shiny.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Bonjour.
Hi.
How you doing there? Yellow.
Hello.
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 Yo.
Hello.
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 Well, hello friends, Marc Mandel here from Wow Moments. Welcome to episode number 4 of Customer Experience Tales from the Trenches. I'm so glad you're here with us and for coming on this journey with my friends and me. We're going to have a fantastic time together on this show today. We're going to spend about 35 or 40 minutes together before we wrap up to go over a pretty packed schedule of stuff I'm hoping to share with you and bring you some value around. You know, but being that this is episode 4 of this show, Tales from the Trenches, I thought I would take just a moment to look back on the first 3 episodes over the last few months that I've done and just really show my gratitude and my thanks to you for helping to support them. I started back 3 months ago when I invited a gentleman named Mark Zides on a call who was representing a company called Luminoso, back then the text analysis company. We did episode 2 when I brought some folks on from Encore. Episode 3 when we talked about the CX and EX connection. Big topics in CX for sure. Today we have what might be an even bigger topic I want to talk about with you guys, and I think it's worth taking a closer look at. And that bigger topic is, you know, the overplayed cliche. I think it's the old Mark Twain quote. You know, the rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated, but as it relates to survey programs. You know, many of us think that surveys had been and continue to be the underpinning of what a CX program is about. Well, today we're going to spend a lot of time unpacking the future of feedback, the future of analytics, the future of what we really need to think about, especially in the light of the fact that we can acknowledge at least that surveys are becoming more and more difficult to get people to take seriously. So we're going to unpack a lot of that on this episode while we're here together today. But before I do that, being that I'm still looking back on some recent time together, I had mentioned at the end of the last episode that October 1st was the global, what they call CX Day, which was a new holiday in our industry over the last number of years that was really sponsored and originated by the Customer Experience Professionals Association, or the CXPA. If you know those guys, you know, when you're talking about CX Day, it's a day where we're supposed to show appreciation for our customers and really for our employees and how we engage. So I wanted to share just a story with you about what I had done at CX Day because it's not new, it's not novel, but it's sure impactful. One of the things I've seen in some of my corporate clients is that the higher level C-level folks, that literally the chief executive, the chief operating officers, the chief marketing officers, the chief revenue officers of some of our clients, you know, they sit in their lofty towers and they rarely, if ever, come down and touch customers unless they're the most important, most strategic customers. And for CX Day this year, it's not a new idea, but what I did was I took 3 CEOs from 3 of my clients and we asked them to spend not just that day, but a day a month, literally putting the headset on and sitting in their frontline customer contact center and take calls and send emails and do chat sessions with customers, because I felt it was best that they stay in touch with customers and customers with them without necessarily even identifying who they were. They could just identify themselves by their first name. This was Tom and this is Sally. And the eye-opening feedback that they had by just spending that day or part of that day in that center with that headset on was eye-opening to them, to the point where they can't wait to come back next month. I'm sharing this story with you not because I'm going to suggest that you do that, but maybe if you would, you might get some benefit. But what I'd love to see in the chat off on the side here is, did you and your company celebrate CX Day back a few weeks ago? And I'm curious to see what you may have done to help acknowledge and show appreciation for your customers. It's a big topic, really, appreciation and authentic appreciation. I'd love to hear some stories about how that went in the comments over there. You know, when I think now about things that I'm doing now, one of the things I like talking about on this show is what I call, and I've named my company after this, what a wow moment is for me. Have I seen something since we last got together here that really wowed me, that really made me go, that's something special. And I really wanted to start to unpack for a moment or two with us here this topic again of, have surveys truly run out of gas? And if they have, what countermeasures can we bring to bear strategically or operationally to make sure we don't get into trouble? I wanted to introduce you, not in person here at this point, but just to an idea of one of my business partners and good friends' company. And if you don't know them, I encourage you to check them out. Their company is called Opinator, which is Opinator. You'll find them on the web at opinator.com. You know, these guys have taken this notion of what is a survey and completely turned it upside down and reinvented surveys from scratch. You may be familiar with, a Qualtrics survey or a Medallia survey or an in-moment survey. Go take a look at what Opinator is about. We're going to unpack Opinator more towards the end of the year in December when I have the gentleman from Opinator on this show with me. But for now, I just want to encourage you to go take a look. One of the things I've been doing on this show, and it's been pretty overwhelmingly popular, is what I call my CX book club, where we take a book or two about customer experience topics and we talk about it here on the show. So I was sent a copy of a book that I'm really excited about called The 10-Second Customer Journey, the CXO's Playbook, written by Todd Unger. I don't know if you know Todd Unger or not, but he's the head of customer experience for the American Medical Association. And this book that he's put together, I think, nails such an important topic that I thought it bears repeating. But I'm going to start off making it a little bit personal. I dog-eared a page here that I want to just read you the opening 2 sentences of. Todd writes that in chapter 3 of his book, customer experience starts with the customer. And this is such a key topic for me. He says, the first step to orchestrating the 10-second customer journey happens before the clock even starts. To borrow an overused term, you can't be, quote, customer-centric unless you start with the customer. And really, when I stop and think about it, that's what customer experience broadly is all about. It's putting yourself up close and personal to that customer and truly empathizing and understanding with them. It's sort of a bone to pick when I talk to friends in the industry and I say, what do you do for a job? And they say, I do CX or I do customer experience. I'm not sure customer experience is something we do. I think the reality is customer experience, by true definition, at least to my definition, it's the perceptions of our customers about us. It's things that they do and things they perceive about us. It's not something that we do. We might choose to manage it. We might choose to improve it. We might choose to optimize it. We might choose to orchestrate it, but we don't do customer experience. But when Todd wrote in his book that the customer experience starts with the customer, I think he really nailed it. But more broadly about this book, he talks about the 10-second customer journey. And his hypothesis there is that customers these days are not going to give us more than 10 seconds. An impression is made in our amygdala, part of our brain, within 10 seconds of making an impression on us and how we need to react. Do we want to engage? Do we want to walk away? And if we only have 10 seconds with somebody, how do we maximize the benefit of that 10 seconds? So I want to encourage you, take a look at Todd's book if you can get it. It's a terrific book, The 10-Second Customer Journey by Todd Unger. I picked this copy up at Amazon. It's available elsewhere as well, but it's well worth it for you. Take a look at it. It's pretty decent. Going back to this question now that I was asking a moment ago about surveys and the death of surveys and whether surveys are relevant or even impactful any longer, I really wanted to use the vast majority of the time that we're together today to unpack that a bit. And I really wanted to unpack that with a couple of good friends. And I've asked a couple of folks to join me here. I'll introduce them more popularly in a second, but I've asked, just so you know who's going to join us, Richard Owen. He's the founder of a company called OCX Cognition. Richard's one of my business partners and a phenomenal thought leader. He'll introduce himself more deeply in just a sec. And I've also asked a gentleman named Troy McHenry to join us. Troy runs the customer listening or member listening program at Blue Cross of North Carolina, my home state Blue Cross plan here. And both of these guys have a ton of experience in helping to think about feedback through different lenses. And I thought it'd be fun to bring these guys into the show, have them introduce themselves, and then we'll just have a good three-way conversation about what's going on, kind of the state of customer feedback analytics, and maybe most to the point, what can we do to avoid kind of this new problem of feedback garbage in, garbage out? Maybe there's a way that we can really do something meaningful. Richard, could I ask you to kick us off by just introducing yourself and your company, and then Troy jump in and follow up, and let's just kind of see where this conversation takes us.
Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Thanks
Thanks for inviting me on. It's nice to be the other side of the camera for a change. So for those of you who don't know, have never heard my name, so I spent the last 20 years in the CX industry. I was the CEO at Satmetrics for about 15 years or so in that business. And Satmetrics, for those of you who might not be familiar, was the company that co-created the Net Promoter Score methodology back in the early 2000s. So my team that was led by the brilliant Dr. Laura Brooks was working with Fred Reichel, who was one of my board members, and came up with all the Net Promoter methodology work back then. And subsequently, we did about 1,000 large-scale enterprise deployments. We really focused on the survey technology we're going to talk about today as the primary mechanism for data collection. And we also launched a successful training program at about 7,000 companies. Probably the world's largest CX training program took part in our certification. Still to this day is, I'm very proud to say, continues in Japan, amongst other places, in the Japanese language. I have no idea what they say makes any sense, but it is in Japanese. So my new business, OCX Cognition, is really focused on supplementing and to some degree replacing survey technology with machine learning. So rather than ask customers, we predict. And the benefit of prediction is you don't have to be hostage to response rates or survey bias, and you get a complete view of every single customer every single day with a high degree of detail. So we think this is the most interesting application of AI to the CX space today.
Interesting. Hey, Troy, you and I are pretty good friends these days, but it dawns on me that a lot of folks who might be listening in may not know you. Can you take a minute and talk about what you do at the company?
Absolutely. Yeah. Troy McHenry, it's great being on with you, Richard, and thanks for inviting me, Mark.
You bet.
Yeah, I lead our measurement and performance practice within CX at Blue Cross NC. I've been in health insurance for 9 years, and then previous to that, 12 years in financial services, and doing really a lot of benchmarking. It's kind of how I got into CX, doing things like Benchmark Portal and JD Power and Dalbar, and then doing more benchmarking with our Blue Cross Association and through vendors like SQM. That's really where I kind of got a taste for it. And so today, my role and my team really is focused around how do we own all of the listening posts that we use at Blue Cross. So any survey that goes out, whether could be on any of our digital properties and portals and websites, mobile app, as well as anything that's transactional in nature. So that could be post-call, post-chat, post-secure message. So we survey a lot, but just like what Richard said, we know too, in the future, right? Like that door is slowly closing on us, right? There's so much survey fatigue. All of us are seeing, NPS questions in surveys, and it seems like we get surveyed even just for buying a cup of coffee. And so we spend a lot of time at Blue Cross too, really understanding how do we get the most, juice for the squeeze when we do send a survey out, and how can we be as thoughtful as possible with still kind of using some of these legacy VOC tools, as we kind of also dip our toe into unstructured listening and really trying to measure the experience and find areas of opportunity, maybe beyond surveying.
Troy, what you're talking about, you use the term, survey fatigue, and it's certainly a real problem out there. It's predating COVID now. So I'm looking back probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe closer to 7. I was with an organization where we went out and we hired an outside agency to try to help us at the time quantify how many surveys were in flight across the United States that year. And they came up with a rough guesstimate. They couldn't pinpoint a number, but they were saying this is probably 2018, give or take, timeframe, late 2017. And the number was 40 billion surveys in the US that year. with the average American adult receiving about 12 a month. And I reflect on that thinking, I have a 15-year-old kid who lives down my street who cuts my grass, once a week. And he sends me a SurveyMonkey survey at the end of the grass cutting to find out if I would recommend him to my friend or colleagues.
I love it.
And how could we not be tired at this point as survey recipients, as survey takers, as survey respondents? What can we do? I'm going to ask you very directly, Troy, and then I want to look for a counterpoint of view from Richard. What could a company do to begin to position for success, either to overcome some of this burnout or to find other ways to gain insight? What's in the toolbox these days?
Yeah, and you definitely have to have a lot of tools to really maximize this investment, right? Because also, while there's been some democratization of surveying tools, right, with like SurveyMonkey and like everyone's making surveys now, right? But not all surveys are created equal. And so, the way I think about it is, okay, how can we make sure that ours stand out of kind of above the fray? So, just like probably like most consumers, I might get 10 surveys a day. I might complete 1 or 2. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, how can I make sure that survey from Blue Cross is maybe the one that person completes on our behalf. And part of it is we are fortunate in that with coming from a health insurer and a payer, right? Our members are more invested in us, right? We're not Netflix. Like I'm probably not completing a survey on Netflix because my engagement's lower, my cost or the stake I have in Netflix is a lot lower, right? So I'm just not that engaged with it. Mm-hmm. But with us being a health payer and a not-for-profit in the state, I think we all automatically get a little bit of a pass, right? Because we just have such a more nuanced and involved relationship. But really what I would say too is something that we've discovered this year that and really in the last 2 years that I'm happy to share is, there's one piece you also have to do now is like email servers in general are getting stricter and stricter in filtering out because spam has been such a problem. And so like if your reply to address and your from address and like the URL for the survey, if those things don't all have like the same domain or subdomain, a lot of email servers are just going to kick you out right out of the bat. And so like you have to think about even like we even start that far back to make sure how can we ensure that our emails are even getting to people's inboxes? Because the moment it goes in that spam or junk folder, it's over, right? You've already lost. And so we even just spend time thinking about that, and of course email quality and validating emails and how do we kind of ensure that. And then you talked about survey fatigue. The other thing I would say is we can't control all the other surveys that are coming out, but like we have to watch just for fatigue internally, right? Yeah. Because we are measuring at touch points, we're doing relational listening, we're doing transactional listening. And so, honoring opt-outs, but also honoring our own blackout periods is super important to us, right? We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot either.
Interesting. Hey, Richard, let me throw something at you. Have you respond to this? You heard me talk about a week ago. You and I have a relationship with a woman who works at a global technology manufacturer, a large brand, who introduced a new problem to me in survey feedback, which was her clients are being instructed, her internal employees are being instructed now to not take surveys from vendors anymore. Because either they want to control that information internally through their vendor management or procurement organizations or something entirely different. So in addition to the technical glitch of things that Troy's talking about, when if the domains don't line up and you become junk mail, or if the fact that we're getting overwhelmed by surveys from a variety of people, now on top of that, we're being told in some cases, like in some B2B cases, you're not even allowed to respond. What do you see out there, Richard, in terms of your world, in terms of that sort of landscape? So
love what Troy had to say. Troy, my friend, you're whistling past the graveyard. I mean, this is you look over the 20 years I've been doing this, and we did millions of surveys, and you could see this trend occurring in the 2000s. And there's two trends which are absolutely unstoppable today. The first is response rates are going to continue to decline. Why? Well, it's something economists, and you know I love to amateur economize, call tragedy of the commons. We're overusing, we're oversaturating our customers' time. As you said, the guy cutting your grass does a survey. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how good your practices are. Your customers are inundated with surveys. They're not adding more time to their day to respond to them. That means that the response rate percentages are dropping. They are going to zero on a long enough timeline. And worse, as they decline, the sample bias is just getting more pronounced. So the quality of the data is becoming less and less. And the question isn't, do you need to get off this train? The question is, when do you get off the train? Because at some point, it will just inevitably become ineffective as a mechanism. And to be honest, what you're talking about in terms of companies and, you know, restricting responses is tiny in the grand scheme of what we're seeing. And I'd like to put this in a bigger context if I could, because in the 1990s, people were doing phone-based survey, right? They were picking up phones and they were doing research. And in fact, I was working for Regis McKenna in 1991. You know, we were doing research on Apple and Sun, and we were calling around buyers, and they'd get on the phone with us for 20 minutes and they'd chit chat. That era has been and gone. And there were people making the argument in the early 2000s that the phone will never die because people only ever want to respond to the phone, and email's not going to eat its lunch. And in fact, you know, we're well invested in doing lots of phone-based data collection. And there's just the laggards of the industry dying out. And people were then adopting email as a next generation technology that was faster, cheaper, more efficient, collecting data. So there's no question that survey-based data collection in CX is done. The question is, when do people get off it to become effective? When does their program become so ineffective that they switch, and when the costs of switching are better? Now, I'm not here to tell you that our approach or my view on the use of predictive analytics is the only way to do it. What I am going to tell you with complete certainty is it's one of the ways that's going to win, because until we get past this basic problem that no matter how well you execute your program, Troy is executing a brilliant program, no matter how well you execute it, your problem is your customer wakes up, opens up their inbox, and if they get the email, to Troy's point, then they think, oh, I got a dozen of these things today. You know, why am I doing this? This is not the way I want to spend my time. Delete. And that's the reality of today. So I think that the CX industry, which I like to think we were part of creating 20 years ago, certainly Net Promoter Score kicked off a big part of excitement. When we now need to recognize that our child has grown, it's matured, it was good, it's now jumped the shark, it's now on the downslope. And the companies that do really interesting things are going to be doing things that don't anchor around the idea customers respond to surveys.
Question for you about this, to open to both of you guys. How much of this do you think is perpetuated by the survey platform vendors out there that are struggling for relevancy going forward? And even the big guys, you know, there's certainly for every startup guy, there's a Medallia or a Qualtrics that has a dominant market position out there. And the question really remains is, you know, are they, even the big guys, are they going to be like, what happens if surveys don't work anymore? What do I do then? You know, and they want to remain relevant and in business and commercially viable, so they're doing what they can. How much of this is just, you know, propaganda, you know, from them to say, yeah, surveys are still going to have teeth, you know, in perpetuity because they want to have teeth in perpetuity?
Yeah, and it's easy, right? It's easy from a business standpoint to do surveys, but I think Richard's exactly right? It's a drowning out, right? And so you do have to think about that. And we actually, when we think about like our listening program, we really think about like there's like three ways to collect VOC. There's direct, which is surveys. There's indirect, and then there's kind of inferred, right? And so we really try to do all three, and we're really trying to get smarter about, okay, if we really don't want to give up surveys, and that's what it is, right? Because it's so easy to do a survey now, right? The cost has gone down because of all these competitors who've entered the marketplace. The tools are only getting better and better, right? And so it's an easy thing, I think, for CX and VOC shops to kind of fall back to. And I think you do have to challenge yourself. And we're really trying to think through, like, where does it make a lot of sense? And it's like we've now have like closed member panels where we're doing surveys, but there's an incentive component, it's an opt-in, and that has been an excellent research tool for us. But yeah, you have to be really mindful too. Okay, what are the things you're really trying to get out of it? What can you only get out of a survey maybe versus if I'm just doing some unstructured listening, listening and mining with AI, whether that's phone calls or chats, right? Or if I want to just do inferred, looking at, tea leaf sessions and look at Adobe Analytics for my websites and portals. Again, I think you have to do almost all of those, but I think, in the future, teams, you just have to get so much smarter, and you can't just keep falling back onto surveys.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Troy. I mean, I think that you're pushing all the right sets of buttons there. I mean, the question mark is, what about the vendors? Well, of course, the vendors are going to be here saying surveys are great. I got 2 words for you, 3 words. First word is AOL, right? I mean, look, there's always an incumbent saying, no, really, we're not dead yet. This is great technology. It's leading the world. Second, faster horses. Look, I mean, what people forget when they use the whole Henry Ford analogy was that, if Henry Ford had been out there saying, well, people want faster horses, what if there were legions of horse salesmen running around saying, no, this motor car's a terrible idea, right? Let me tell you, I got a much spiffier horse over here. And good news, horse prices are way off this year. It's like an 80% discount on horses. There is this is the technology industry, and it goes through this. Every cycle, companies benefit from a technology wave and cycle, and then they get caught on the wrong side of it, and they decline. And very rarely do they transition to the next generation of technology, because usually the new wave benefits the new entrants. So Tom Siebel, fastest growing company to $1 billion in the 1990s. Where are they now? Buried in Oracle somewhere. How did Salesforce take over? Cloud was a monumental change in the way companies consumed data. A new generation of company arrives that is cloud-based. You didn't see Siebel back in 1999 saying, you know what, we give up, we throw the towel in. They were saying, no, look, on-prem. There's a lot of benefits for a highly customized on-prem solution. But the market, early adopters first, then the mass market, looked at it and said, this cloud stuff's crazy better and cheaper. So I think that the existing vendors are somewhat in trouble. Qualtrics has been the major beneficiary of consolidation in the industry. They've been mopping up the long tail players. That's been a great strategy for them. And as probably the most cost-efficient, commoditizing vendor in the space, they're the short-term winner. But in the long term, that's a harder thing to win unless they can find new areas of growth for their business. And everybody else in the industry, with all due respect, and with respect, because these have been great companies, some of them very well-run companies, they're all on the downslope. And Mark, you know this probably because you have friends in these companies as well as I do. They are all on the downslope. They are cutting costs. They are laying people off. Yep. Because survey prices are going to zero. You can renegotiate your contract now and get 50% off. And this is how industries change over time. It's not a terrible thing. It's technology.
And I think the tricky thing is, as some of these newer tools make available, that's what I think is going to be this push pull for the short term, is just around cost, right? Like some of these newer tools probably are better, and they obviously require lower effort for the consumer, right? They're not having to get an email, you're not filling their inbox, they're not having to complete a survey. But I think it's going to be hard for companies to adopt those because, again, not only are surveys easier, but they're so cheap. And so I think what we'll see is, I think we will see a migration somewhat as the tools improve, as companies get more comfortable with AI, right? And how do we spend a lot of time too, like, how do you do the plumbing in the background? Like, how do you get those call recordings, those chat transcripts, those secure messages, those open-ended comments across all of our existing surveys?
That's a great point, Troy. If I interject in support of what you're saying, look, I think in reverse order. First of all, I think the integration and the plumbing now is becoming much more important. Standalone is not that interesting, and so you need to become adept at that as a science and as an IT discipline within the company. And look, no company has ideal data. You know, the magical perfect CDP in the cloud doesn't exist. Everyone's trying to find a way to work with limited data, and that's going to be the reality of it. But your other point about price is spot on, and costs have come down. I think if you look at the total cost of what people spend on their programs, though, the fact that the survey tool has become commoditized and cheap doesn't really make a relevant dent in the budget, right? The big budget items, and I'm sure it's true for you, Troy, people, you know, by far and away the biggest single budget item, probably drowns out the cost of vendors. And then, you know, as I would see the decline in cost of surveying as freeing up budget to be more adventurous, to bring in new technologies. If your company wants to cut budgets every year on CX programs, then you're facing a problem. And the education effort is, no, reduction in price in surveys doesn't mean we can cut budgets. It means that we're going to have the resources to fund new initiatives out of the same budget we spent last year. And that's great. We're going to get more for the same price.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think companies that are in that CX space, software companies, I think the smart ones are going to find these partnerships, right? I mean, you're definitely seeing it with Qualtrics too, right? Where they're trying to really grow, you know, beyond maybe what they originally had, or have some of these great and key partnerships. Yeah.
Interesting, guys. I'd like to ask you guys both a kind of maybe a pointed question, but I think it's one that begs to be asked. Those of us that do rely on surveys or any other feedback mechanism, we do it for really one reason, is to gain insight about our customers and to run better analytics, to be able to make better decisions. How compromised, if at all, do we get in our decision-making ability when the feedback gets harder to come by and the data that we do collect is sketchy and thin? You know, are we getting to the point at this point where we have, the term I used earlier was garbage in, garbage out in our feedback program? Are we getting to that point? Are we seeing that? Are we seeing where we're relying on this mechanism, this legacy mechanism, and yet if the data went from used to be 30%, 40% response rates, and now we're seeing 5 to 15% response rates, you know, where is the trade-off? Where is the sacrifice? Is it in quality? Is it in reliability? Where do we see the problems come up?
And this is maybe where I'm a little contrarian, but I think that's still why companies like surveys so much, is because even though you're having this declining response rate, the data is clean because it is direct, right? I'm asking very pointed, specific questions. I'm getting very pointed responses, right? I'm getting some great qualitative data. I'm getting tons of quantitative data. And I think businesses and C-suite, they like that, right? They love NPS, they love OSAT, they love ease or effort, right? Because those are really discrete measurements that you can measure, and then you can slice very easily by demographics or by product or whatever. And so I think that's that's going to be a headwind for some of these other technologies, is how do you still make it discrete? Obviously, you know, we're using tools where we can measure things like sentiment and effort for those with that unstructured data, but it's still messy. It's still messier than my survey data is, right? And so, yeah, I think that's still a barrier to overcome.
Yeah, Richard, I think you're coming from a place of real, in my opinion, real innovation in this space. I'd love to take a moment and just have you lay out for the listeners here how you guys tackle this, and kind of what your building blocks are and what you've done in the AI space for this.
And I'd emphasize, I mean, we focus a lot on B2B, which has a very different set of elements than B2C, right?
Yep.
I mean, at the end of the day, my perspective is a little different than Troy's, you might imagine. You know, I think that the relevance of this survey data, or even though it's sort of tablets from the mountain still coming down at customer set X, from an analytic perspective, I think it's becoming junk science because the sample bias has become so profound. And Fred Reichel did an interesting piece, I think it was Bain published, showing that NPS scores gathered through surveys now have such bias that you can't assume they are accurate as a reflection of the business. And actually, actual NPS is very different. How do we know that? Well, to some extent, that's a product of our approach. So we see survey data as only really interesting to the degree at which you can train machines to think like customers. So
Interesting.
I'm interested in how a survey informs customer trade-offs of the operational performance of the company. So if a survey can educate a machine as to how customers in general make trade-offs, and it can, because that's much less subject to sample bias than looking at actual NPS scores, for example. Once I've trained a machine to think like a customer, now I have a customer who will answer 1,000 questions a day, every day, without bias, and every single customer will give me a data point. And not just a data point, they'll tell me exactly how they came to that conclusion and how all of my operations affected that outcome, how I can attribute to that. So that's 100x, 200x the quantity of data. More profoundly, it's more accurate than surveying. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because we're able to back test. We also know that it doesn't have bias. We pull out more detractors who don't respond to surveys by saying these people are highly probability driven to become detractors. And then we look at their financial performance, and lo and behold, they turn out to behave like detractors. So we're now at a point where we can be both more accurate, more comprehensive, more complete, and more analytical than anything you can do in surveys. And that took 4 years of hard research. And yes, based on 1,000 enterprise data sets that we accumulated over the previous 15 years. But the fact remains that this is now the better mousetrap. And what it's teaching us about surveys is very interesting. It's teaching us a lot of survey data collection are asking questions that make no difference to the outcome whatsoever. They carry no signal in a predictive sense. So we're learning that customers are wasting their customers' time by simply asking irrelevant questions. We're learning that surveys massively undersample detractors. So what's happening is people are reporting an NPS of 30 or 40, where it's really 10 or 5. And we're learning that extrapolation is a broken science when response rates get below a certain level. And so essentially, we're confusing small sample groups with overall behavior of population. In consumer markets, problematic. In business to business, absolutely breaks the bank because of the heterogeneity of customers.
I could see that. Troy, anything to add to what Richard's talking about, or a different point of view?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I think businesses, especially with us with B2C, right? And we do also B2B, right? Because we have a lot of different stakeholders across Blue Cross, right? We're dealing with providers and doctors and physicians. We're dealing with agents and employer groups, and then individual consumers. But I think what we also sometimes forget, or I don't think that companies take advantage of as much, is that survey can also be a touch point, right? It doesn't just have to be a one-way thing. If we're asking you to do something, right? Like, to me, a great post-call survey could be an email you get 2 hours after your call, and in it is a summary of that call for your records. And hey, we've bulleted out what's that customer service rep going to do for you? What was the homework for them, right? Now, all of a sudden, that email isn't just spam or a survey, right? But now it actually has value that I want to keep. And oh, by the way, we'd love to ask you how we did, right? So I think if done right, these touch points that are also trying to collect some VOC and do a survey can also help build a brand, can help reinforce it, and can kind of keep, it can just be another touch point.
Absolutely. I think you can build a brand. I think it does represent a brand statement. But I stand by the fact that you're still just touching a fraction of customers. I mean, if you look at contact centers, it's a more pronounced problem because now you're dealing with a fraction of customers who happen to have issues, which are a fraction of a fraction, who then respond to surveys, or a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, and have inherent bias because what you're really learning about is that touch point. They're basically got recency bias, which is great for understanding contact center performance. And don't get me wrong, I think to some extent that still is the most useful current application of that technology, is looking at touch points and really understanding tactical execution of touch points. I think it's useful today, frankly, in understanding overall NPS. I just think that's dead. And I think I'm speaking from a position of some confidence there in terms of what we see in data. But I think I think understanding how you're performing in, say, a contact center, there's a lot of good technology there. And Troy's talking about some of the other areas, NLP, sentiment analysis, text analytics, pulling all that together in a contact center for consumers. And I think there's a rich data set to mine. And if you can organize it, make sense of it, that's the last bastion. Remember, was it the Twin Towers, the second Lord of the Rings thing, when they retreat to the fort, and the keep within the fort? I think for surveying, that's the keep within the fort. They don't have to ride out yet to face the orcs. They're still hanging in there.
Nice metaphor.
And I think you're exactly right. Surveying is always going to be sampling, right? And so these newer tools, like we're using too, like we mine 100% of our inbound phone calls, right? We're going to answer 4 million calls this year, and like no call, no interaction, no needle goes unseen now, which is great. And it has been incredibly powerful for us, right? If someone wants to ask us, hey, how many calls are we getting about this particular health network, or about this particular product, or about this particular, urgent care, whatever, like we can know finitely, there's no sample bias. We can say, hey, this is what is popping on the calls that we're handling from members. This is what's on members. Yeah. But I agree that still only gets to customer service, right? How can you actually get broader than that is kind of that next undiscovered country for us, right? Beyond just touch points.
Hey, Troy, I know we're going to be having to wrap up in a moment for the sake of time, although this could go on all day. One of the things I've seen on prior shows that we've done, it's people love a tip, or they love sort of an idea that they can take back to their work and do in their program, next week or next month, and maybe see some lift. Is there some advice that you can give the listeners on this show that, based on your own experience at the job that you're doing, that, hey, if you think about this or that in a different light than what you're doing already, maybe there's a benefit to them that you can share? Is there any kind of quick tip that you can give?
At least from a survey response rate, and I should say in some of our lines of business, we're in double-digit response rates still, right? Which is unusual.
You're the guys that are getting double.
But again, we're a little bit unique in how we're positioned in the company and our brand and what we do. But I will say what has helped us, and I think this is transferable to a lot of different companies, but probably predominantly B2C, but could be B2B too, is you always have to understand, you have to almost lead with, why am I doing this, right? What's either a with them, like what's in it for me, or what's in it for you? And so we have struggled in the past with some of our response rates. And I agree, though, it's still like it's a dying, thing, but we're getting good success. And something that gave us immediate lift was just to honestly be very transparent to say, this is what we're going to use your feedback to do, right? This is whether it's a post-transaction survey. So then we're going to say, this is the primary measure, which is true. We're not lying, we're not being insincere, but this is the primary way we measure the performance of our customer service reps, right? Just saying something like that, or if you can collect that feedback we do from a B2B standpoint, and then we come back around later to say, thank you. This is from like a relational side. This is how we used your feedback. This is how it influenced changes we made in the enterprise based on this. That is golden, right? Because no one wants to complete a survey or do any sort of VOC and they feel like it's just going in a black hole, right? Yeah. And it's not being actioned on. So if there's any way to close the loop, not just from like an inner loop, like for that one member or consumer or customer, but actually, even from a macro level, like if you have a newsletter that goes out to all of your agents or all of your clients, and then you say, hey, thank you for your results from this last survey. This is what we showed, and this is what we're doing about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, Richard, I'm going to ask you to take us home on this conversation with a similar question. Obviously, in my opinion, at least, there's no topic bigger than AI these days in customer experience or otherwise. And you guys at OCX Cognition are becoming a significant player in the CX AI space. What advice can you give somebody who's thinking about what role does AI play in my go forward business strategy, where they can make a bet or two in a reasonable way and expect to see some potentially low-hanging fruit impact? Where would you have them start?
Yeah, so first of all, I think there's a certain amount of education people have to do around AI. It's labeled on everything. There's a lot of AI washing, and there's a lot of solutions looking for problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you understand what problems you're trying to solve to start with, then you'll start to see the application of these technologies. So NLP, machine learning, large language models are very different types of technology, and they all get labeled AI, and they all serve different purposes, and they sort things out. So I think what we're going to see is people get smart about this, learn about it. I think that vendors will educate you. That's the best thing. They're very happy to educate you. But understand the applications of these technologies and what problems they solve, because they don't solve every problem conceivably, and they're not necessarily the best way to solve particular types of problems. So I think that CX professionals have to go to school. And the one thing I'd say is, if you think your job as a CX professional is a survey professional, then you are harnessing yourself to a dead-end technology career-wise. If you think your job as a CX professional is somebody who is going to drive business change and transformation through the use of data, insight around the customer, then that's a pretty expansive tent you can use to look at lots of solutions and try and find the best one for your company that's going to solve the particular problems you have. And Troy gave, great examples in his presentation of thinking about this broadly, looking at different technologies. And AI is just a technology set. So don't buy into the hype. Be skeptical but positive. It's a very powerful set of tools. It is going to change the industry, but make your own determinations as to how it can solve the problems you have. And if you can't see the connection between the technology and the problem solution, then you're probably looking at the wrong products.
Great points, guys. Both of you. Thank you for that. How can our listeners find you guys if they want to follow up directly with either of you?
LinkedIn, is the best way in my opinion. So just search for Troy McHenry on LinkedIn, and I'll pop right up.
Exactly right. I'm there on LinkedIn or www.ocxcognition.com. But feel free. Love to hear from people.
Yeah,
gentlemen, as always, thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for indulging me and my friends who are listening in on this conversation to be part of this journey. You guys are terrific, and I just really wanted to say from my heart, thank you both for being part of this story. Appreciate you guys. And guys, we're gonna move on from this segment now. We're gonna go to one more segment before we wrap up the entire show. And I wanted to do so by revisiting this book that I talked about a little while ago, that Todd Unger's book, The 10-Second Customer Journey. I've been thinking about this book since I said to you 30 minutes ago, go check it out on Amazon. If you haven't yet, do me a favor. Send me an email, send me a direct message, send me a comment here on the comment screen, and I'll do my best to get you a copy for nothing. I love this book. I think it's a terrific book. And because you've been so kind as to hang out with us here on this show and to be part of this story and this journey, I want to share it with you. I'll make sure that you get copies. Just all you have to do is ping me and say, get me a copy of Todd's book, and I'll make sure it's on its way to you. So that's on me. Last topic on my list of things is what's coming up. What's coming up in the next month or so for me here. We're going to do another one of these episodes in November. We're trying to do one every month. And so we're going to do one right before Thanksgiving, where I'm going to be talking more about survey feedback. And in this case, I've mentioned before a company called Opinator. I'm going to ask the CEO of Opinator to join along with one of his customers to talk about the reinvention of surveys and what that really means and the potential impact of that. But beyond that show, I'm starting a brand new show, a brand new series that I've decided to call CX Unsung Heroes. And what this is going to be about, it's going to be a shorter format. It's going to be about a 15-minute conversational format from beginning to end, where each episode I've asked one of my industry friends, generally a client-side practitioner, to join me on the call. And we're going to just talk about things that they now know that they wish they knew when they were beginning, and how these guys are sort of the behind the scenes operators that are pushing the levers and making things really happen. The very first episode of that show, of Unsung Heroes show, is going to actually launch on Halloween Day on October 31st, where a gentleman named Dan Comanduli is going to join us. And you should know Dan Comanduli. You should check him out on LinkedIn. Dan is currently the head of CX Insights for US Cellular, the mobile phone carrier out of Chicago. And he's just a really terrific guy. You should get ready to hear his talk, and I'll make sure that you guys get invited to that show when we launch it as well. So in November, we're going to have Opinator on this show, and we're going to have Dan Comanduli on the new show. And then, of course, every week I'm doing my Minute to Win It show, where you have little kind of quick bite-sized chunks of CX stuff as well. So with that, I'm going to just simply wrap up here, guys, by simply saying thank you again from my heart for coming on this journey with me. Episode 4 was fun to do here. I can't wait for episode 5. And I want to say you guys being here makes all the difference. So you guys are terrific. Thank you for all of the support that you've given. And I'll see you in a few weeks. Take care, my friends.